Hi. So today I wanted to make a little bit of an impromptu video, and that is about rich versus poor neighborhoods in Japan. And if you live in Japan for even a little while and explore different areas of a certain city, especially Tokyo, because that's the city I know the most about, to be honest, you will start to realize when you're walking through a rich neighborhood versus a poor neighborhood. And I just want to clarify, by poor neighborhood, I don't mean like abject poverty. I more mean just like a working class neighborhood, a neighborhood that's relatively cheap to live in. So these are the two types of neighborhoods that I'll be comparing today. And I also want to note I won't be talking about middle class neighborhoods in Japan. But honestly, middle class neighborhoods are probably the neighborhood that is the most common in Japan and the one you're going to see the most often. Um, but I want to kind of talk about the two quote unquote extremes, the rich versus poor neighborhoods in Japan, just so you can learn a little bit more about the types of places you might run into. So, I first want to talk about the rich neighborhoods because that might be the most interesting thing to talk about right off the bat. And so, when you're in a rich neighborhood, what do you notice? You know in Japan that you're in a rich neighborhood when all of a sudden everything gets a very like minimalistic, often like dark colored aesthetic. And you'll see a lot of just like clean lines, negative space, and a lot of other, yeah, like really minimalist architecture. And there's less stuff like on the street. Like there's less like, you know, um, lit up signs and stuff, advertising restaurants or whatever. Everything becomes very reserved. And if you're in an area like that, you might be in a rich neighborhood. And another indicator of it is that obviously you're going to be seeing a lot of like high end cars suddenly driving past you. And, you'll have like Mercedes, Lexus, whatever, stuff like that. And you'd be like, wow, all of a sudden I feel like I feel really poor. And you might just be a normal, average person. You're like, all of a sudden I feel almost uncouth, if that's the right word. I don't even know what that means. But and you're like, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel so out of place? And you're like, wait a minute, I'm in a rich neighborhood, aren't I? So, another thing you might realize in a rich neighborhood in Japan is that there is going to be less public transportation options. There's not going to be like zero, like, you'll probably still have a couple train or subway stations. But because, like, wealthier people generally can afford a car and rely on cars more, you're going to see a lot more like infrastructure made for cars than for, I would say, the average person living in a Japanese city who does not own a car. And another thing you might notice about a rich neighborhood in Japan is that all of a sudden it becomes very quiet. like it just, like the noise level is definitely a lot more muted in a rich neighborhood to the point where you might feel like you're again loud and kind of out of place, even just walking and talking at your normal volume. Whereas in other Japanese neighborhoods, generally, it's not like that. So let me get a little bit into the pros and cons of, a rich neighborhood in Japan. So some of the pros are that in general, you'll find some really nice restaurants in a rich neighborhood. Some of them, like some of the, Michelin starred restaurants in Japan will probably be found in a higher class neighborhood, though not always. And so if you're looking for a like relatively more expensive, higher end, nice meal, that's where you can go to find that. Another pro is that like the architecture honestly is really beautiful. Like even the random, high-rise apartment buildings are like just really nice to look at, especially if you're into like contemporary minimalist whatever type of architecture, which I am. I know a lot of people think it's kind of dead and soulless, but I personally like it. So when I'm walking through a rich neighborhood in Japan, one that I definitely cannot afford, I'm like, wow, look at that. Nice. Look at that building. So pretty. So that's a lot of what I'm doing when I'm there. And again, another thing that could be a pro if you're a really quiet person is that rich neighborhoods in Japan are generally pretty quiet. And, but that could also be a con because you might feel like if you even make a little bit of noise, people are going to like give you the side eye, right? When in most neighborhoods, if you make a little bit of noise, like within reason, like nobody really cares. So, yeah. And so let me talk about the cons of a rich neighborhood. Obviously, rent is going to be way more expensive than other areas in Japan. Like rent in, Minato-ku in Tokyo, for example, is pretty much like pretty outrageous compared to the rest of the country, even though maybe compared to big cities in your country, it might actually still be reasonable. So, another con about living in a rich neighborhood or even visiting one is that often it's kind of boring. Like, usually there's not much to do. Like, usually it's just houses, maybe some juku, which is like an after school program, a cram school for like, highly competitive kids in Japan, or really any kids in Japan. Um, there might be some restaurants, maybe a few bars, but besides that, there's not going to be that much to do. Like rich neighborhoods tend to be pretty residential. Now, the one exception to this in Tokyo is probably Ginza because Ginza is a lot more of a like a shopping area than and a recreational area than it is residential. So you're going to find a lot of bars and shops and everything you could, possibly want in Ginza. But besides that, it's a little bit boring in rich neighborhoods to be honest. And the same thing with the people who live there, they're generally more reserved and very, polite and refined, and that might become annoying when you just want to, be a normal person around your neighbors and not, act all formal all the time. This is just what I've observed. I'm not saying this is everyone in a rich neighborhood, but in general, that's what I have seen. Okay, so now let's talk about quote unquote poor neighborhoods in Japan. And they're really going to be more like working class neighborhoods than like actually poor areas. But in general, these working class neighborhoods are a lot more lively. Like there's a lot more stuff on the street. Like you'll see like a lot of pharmacies or clothing stores with like their goods just being sold on the street, kind of. And you have to kind of, and you can just like look at it from the street. And it's a lot easier than having to like go into a store to see what's in there. So this I kind of like, but also it can get annoying if there's a lot of people on the street and you're getting blocked by like, a bunch of goods being sold. But that is something you're going to see in more working class neighborhoods. It's just more like, products being sold actually on the street or right next to the street, and a lot more like, just a lot more, I guess you could say, crowded or maximalist, so to speak, aesthetic. Like there's going to be a lot of light up signs for different restaurants and stuff. There's also probably just going to be more people there because, I mean, let's be honest, there's more working class people than there are rich people, just in general. So there's going to be a lot of people walking on the sidewalk too, because less people there like own a car. So a lot more people rely on public transportation. And what you'll actually find, at least in a city in Japan, is that the poorer areas of the city will have a lot better public transportation because they know that everyone basically has to rely on it to get to work, etc. So you're definitely going to see that. It'll also probably be a bit more noisy of an area. It's not going to be outrageously noisy usually. Because Japan is generally a quieter country when it just comes to general noise level, but it'll definitely be a little more lively than a rich neighborhood would be. And of course, this can be a pro or con depending on what kind of person and what you are and like what kind of noise level you want, right? Okay, so let's talk about the pros of a working class neighborhood in Japan. Now, one of the main pros is just the price. The prices of everything are a lot more reasonable. You can find really good meals for like 500 yen to 1,000 yen, which in USD is literally like $3 to $7. You can find it pretty easily. These days with inflation, it's probably going to be a little more than that or on the upper end of that, but you can still find some really cheap dining options in these more working class neighborhoods. And that doesn't mean it's going to taste bad though. Like a lot of like really good chefs just work at a local, restaurant that just serves the local community, and like the food is like top notch, and also a lot of like, I guess, chefs who actually have won awards have restaurants in these neighborhoods as well. But usually their restaurant is a little more casual, less hoity toity, so to speak, and a little just more like walk in, what do you want? You here, great. You chose that, great. You get it 5 minutes later, and it's like a fast paced kind of thing in these neighborhoods versus a higher class dining experience. Of course, also, if you want to find cheap rent in a city in Japan, like the working class neighborhoods are where it's at. Like you can find rent that's like really cheap, especially outside of Tokyo. In other smaller cities, you can find rent for like maybe even like 20,000 yen a month, which is like under 200 US dollars. I'm not going to promise that, but like it's possible to find it. And the good thing about these neighborhoods too is that the working class neighborhoods in Japan are generally not dangerous. Like they're very safe. So you don't have anything to worry about there as you might need to worry about in other countries in like similar neighborhoods, right? So that's good. And another pro is that the people there are generally a little more outgoing and a little friendlier. Of course, most people in Japan are pretty reserved compared to like other people all over the world, but like in general, like in a more working class neighborhood, you'll find people who really don't mind, striking up conversation just casually. Again, but I'm not saying that's 100% going to happen. And something that's not really a pro or a con, which I kind of mentioned before, is that, again, working class neighborhoods in Japan are going to be a lot more colorful, a lot more lively than the richer neighborhoods. And so if you like sort of a colorful maximalist aesthetic, so to speak, that might be where you want to look to live if you really like, being exposed to that. So about the cons of a poorer neighborhood in Japan, again, the noise level might be a little bit higher, but it's not going to be terrible. It can also be chaotic at times because it can get crowded because so many people are pedestrians, right? Because they don't own a car. So it can get a little chaotic sometimes, but it can really get chaotic anywhere. It can get chaotic in Ginza, obviously, which is a rich neighborhood. So it really just depends on where you are and how much foot traffic your neighborhood gets. That's the biggest factor. So, yeah, that's really it when it comes to comparing rich versus poor neighborhoods in Japan. I gotta say that I prefer the working class neighborhoods just because people are generally more down to earth, and of course, everything's cheaper, including rent. So that's just my preference. Um, but yeah, let me know in the comments if you've visited different neighborhoods in Japan, different neighborhoods in Tokyo, and what you think of them. And tell me a little bit about neighborhoods in your country and the differences between them. So, yeah, that's it for me today. So, bye.